Alice in Wonderland. Chapter 6. The Duchess and the Cheshire Cat. Inside, a large, ugly woman sat with a baby in her arms. There was a cook by the fire and there was food on the table. Near the fire, there was a large cat with a big smile. This smile went from ear to ear on its face. I think that woman is the Duchess, thought Alice. Can girls speak to duchesses? She wondered. But the Duchess did not say anything to her, so Alice asked, "Please, why is your cat smiling?" "Because it's a Cheshire cat, that's why," said the Duchess. "So Cheshire cats can smile." "I didn't know that," said Alice. "You don't know much," said the Duchess. "That's not very polite," thought Alice. She started to say something. Suddenly, the cook threw a plate at the Duchess. The Duchess didn't move. The cook threw more things, plates, cups, spoons. Some of them hit the Duchess and the baby. The Duchess did nothing, but the baby started to cry. "Oh, don't throw things at the baby," cried Alice. "You'll hit its pretty nose." "You be quiet, it isn't your baby," the Duchess shouted. She began to sing to it. These were the words of the song. "Be angry with your little boy. And hit him when he cries. He has to know that he's a child. He's really not your size." The cook sang the song too. When they finished, they sang it again. The Duchess started to throw the baby up and down. At the end of the song, she threw the baby to Alice. "Here, you can have it now," she said. "I have to get ready. I'm going to see the Queen." The cook threw another plate at the Duchess. It didn't hit her, but she left the room quickly. Alice looked at the baby. It was a strange little thing and not very pretty. She took it outside. "I'll have to take this child away from here, or they'll kill it," she thought. The baby made a strange little sound and she looked at it again. "Its nose is changing," she cried. She looked at it very carefully. "Its face is changing, everything is changing. Oh, it's not a baby anymore, it's a pig." It was very strange, but the baby was now a pig. "What am I going to do with it?" Alice thought. The pig made another, louder sound. Alice put the little animal down and it ran happily away into the wood. "It wasn't a pretty baby, but it's quite a pretty pig," thought Alice. She looked round her and jumped. The Cheshire Cat was up in one of the trees. The cat smiled at Alice. "It looks kind, but perhaps it will get angry." "They all get angry in this place," thought Alice. So she spoke to it very politely. "Cheshire Cat, dear," she said. The cat's smile got bigger. "Please, can you help me?" "I want to go somewhere new," said Alice. "Where do you want to go?" asked the cat. "Somewhere different," Alice said. "Somewhere different," repeated the cat. It thought for a minute or two. Then it said, "Walk that way and you'll come to a house. A man lives there. He makes hats and he's very strange. We call him the Mad Hatter." "But I don't want to meet a strange man," said Alice. The cat didn't answer her. It said, "Walk this way and you'll find the March Hare. He's strange too. But I told you, I don't want to meet strange animals." "Oh, you can't help that," said the cat. "We're all strange here. I'm strange. You're strange." "How do you know I'm strange?" asked Alice. "Of course you are," the cat said. "Everybody's strange here. I'm very strange. I laugh when I'm sad, and I cry when I'm happy." "That's strange. Are you going to see the Queen today?" "She's quite strange too. "I'd like to see the Queen," Alice said, "but I haven't got an invitation." "You'll see me in the Queen's garden," said the Cheshire Cat, and vanished. "That's strange, but not very strange," thought Alice. She waited for 2 minutes, and the cat came back again. "What happened to the baby?" it asked. "It changed into a pig," Alice said. "I knew it," said the cat, and vanished again. Alice stayed under the tree for a short time. "Perhaps it will come back again," she thought. But it didn't. "I think I'll go and visit the March Hare," said Alice. She started to walk to his home. After some minutes, she heard a sound. She looked up, and there was the Cheshire Cat in a tree, a different tree. "Did you say, pig?" asked the cat. "Yes," Alice answered. Then she said, "Cheshire Cat, 1 minute you vanish and the next minute you're there again. I don't like it." "I know," said the cat. And this time it vanished quite slowly. First its body went, then its legs. Then all of it vanished, and there was only its smile. There are a lot of cats without a smile, but a smile without a cat. "Now that's very strange," Alice said. Slowly, the Cheshire Cat's smile vanished too, and Alice began to walk again. She saw the March Hare's house through the trees. It was bigger than the Duchess's house. Alice ate some of the white mushrooms. She got bigger again. In a short time, she was about 60 centimeters high. She felt afraid, but walked to the house. "I hope the March Hare isn't too strange," she thought. Chapter 7. A Tea Party. There was a tree in front of the house. Under the tree was a big table with a lot of chairs round it. But there were only 3 at the table: the Mad Hatter, the March Hare, and a large brown mouse. The mouse sat between the Mad Hatter and the March Hare. It was asleep, so they talked over its head. When they saw Alice, they cried, "No, no, you can't sit here. There isn't a place for you." "There are a lot of places," Alice said. She sat down in a chair at one end of the table. "Have some wine," the Mad Hatter said politely. Alice looked round the table, but there was only tea. "I don't see any wine," she answered. "There isn't any," said the March Hare. "Then why did you say, 'Have some wine'?" "It wasn't very polite of you," Alice said angrily. "We didn't invite you to tea, but you came." "That wasn't very polite of you," said the March Hare. "No, it wasn't." "Cut your hair," said the Mad Hatter. "Oh, be quiet," said Alice. The Mad Hatter opened his eyes very wide, but he said nothing. Then he took out his watch and looked at it. "What day is it?" he asked. Alice thought for a little. "Wednesday, I think," she said. "My watch says Monday," the Mad Hatter said. "You see, I was right. Butter isn't good for a watch." He looked angrily at the March Hare. "But it was the best butter," answered the March Hare. "Yes, but you put it in with the bread knife. Perhaps some bread got in." The March Hare took the watch from the Mad Hatter and looked at it sadly. Then he put it in his tea. He took it out and looked at it again. "It was the best butter, you know," he repeated. Alice looked at the watch. "It's a strange watch," she said. "It tells you the day, but it doesn't tell you the time." "So? Does your watch tell you the year?" asked the Mad Hatter. "No," Alice answered, "but it's the same year for a very long time." "And my watch doesn't tell the time because it's always tea time," said the Mad Hatter. Alice thought about that. "I don't really understand you," she said politely. She looked round the table. There were a lot of teacups on the table. "We move from place to place," said the Mad Hatter. "Don't you wash the cups?" asked Alice. "No, we don't have time," said the Mad Hatter. "Why not?" asked Alice. "It's a long story," said the Mad Hatter. "Time was my friend, you see. But he and I aren't friends now. So he doesn't do anything for me. And I don't have time for anything." "I see," said Alice and smiled politely. But she didn't really understand. "Oh, look. The mouse is asleep again," said the Mad Hatter. He took his teacup and put a little hot tea on the mouse's nose. It woke up and started to sing. "Be quiet," the Mad Hatter said very loudly, and the mouse stopped singing. "Have some more tea," the March Hare said to Alice. "Thank you, but I haven't got any tea. So how can I have some more?" "You can have more," the Mad Hatter said. "You can have more than nothing." "I don't think," Alice began. "Then don't speak," the Mad Hatter said. Alice got up angrily and walked away from the table into the woods. "Perhaps they'll call me back," she thought. "And then they'll be nice to me and give me some tea and bread and butter." But they didn't say anything. When she looked back, the mouse was asleep with its head on its plate. "I'll never go there again," Alice said. "That was a stupid tea party." She looked round and saw a door in one of the trees. "A door in a tree? That's strange," she thought. And she opened the door and went inside. "Oh, good," she cried. She was back in the long room, near the little table. "I'm small now. I can get through the little door into the garden." The key was on the table. She took it and opened the little door. Then she ate some of the brown mushroom. She started to get smaller. When she was about 30 centimeters high, she walked through the door into the garden. Chapter 8. Inside the garden near Alice was a small tree with flowers on it. There were 3 gardeners by the tree. "Be careful, 5, one of them said. "I'm always careful, 7, answered 5. Alice went to them. "What are you doing?" she asked. "We're making the flowers red," one of the gardeners said. "That's strange," thought Alice. "Why?" she asked. The 3 men looked unhappy. "You tell her," 7, 5 said. "No," said 7, "you tell her, too." "Well, miss, the Queen wanted trees with red flowers on them. But this tree's got white flowers. We don't want the Queen to see it. She'll be very angry and cut off our heads. So we're making the flowers red before she sees them." "Oh no!" 5 shouted suddenly. "The Queen! The Queen!" The 3 gardeners fell to the ground, with their faces down. Alice heard the sound of many feet and turned round. "Oh good," she thought. "Now I'll see the Queen." First, 10 men with clubs in their hands came into the garden. Next came the king's men. There were 10 of them, and they had red diamonds on their clothes. The children of the king and queen came next, all with red hearts. After them there were a lot more people. Most of them were kings and queens. The White Rabbit was there, but he didn't see Alice. The Knave of Hearts came next. Last of all were the King and Queen of Hearts. When these people saw Alice, they all stopped. The Queen said to the Knave of Hearts, "Who is this?" The Knave of Hearts didn't know. So he smiled and said nothing. "Stupid man!" shouted the Queen. She turned to Alice and said, "What's your name, child?" "My name is Alice, madam," Alice answered. She didn't feel very afraid of the Queen. "They're only cards," she thought. The Queen looked at the gardeners. They were on the ground and she couldn't see their faces. "Who are these men?" she asked. "Don't ask me. I don't know," answered Alice, not very politely. The Queen's face got redder and redder. She looked at Alice and shouted, "Cut off her head." "Cut, oh, be quiet," said Alice. The Queen stopped shouting. The King put his hand on her arm. He said quietly, "Don't be angry, my dear. She's only a child." The Queen turned away from him angrily. "Turn those men over," she said to the Knave of Hearts. The knave did this very carefully, with one foot. "Get up," the Queen shouted. The 3 gardeners jumped up. The Queen turned to the little tree and looked at it carefully. "What's wrong with these flowers?" she asked the gardeners. "Well, you see, madam," said 2. They were white, and the Queen looked from the flowers to the men. "I see," she said. "Cut off their heads." Everybody started walking again. The gardeners ran to Alice. "Help us," they cried. Alice put them behind some trees. "Don't be afraid," she said. "They're not going to cut off your heads." The King's men looked for the gardeners but couldn't find them. "Are their heads off?" shouted the Queen. "Yes, madam," shouted the King's men. "Good," shouted the Queen. Everybody started walking again and Alice walked with them. "It's a very fine day," somebody said. Alice turned round and there was the White Rabbit next to her. "Very," said Alice. "Where's the Duchess?" "Quiet," said the rabbit and looked all round him. Then he put his mouth near to Alice's ear. "They're going to cut off her head," he said. "Why?" asked Alice. "Did you say, 'Oh no'?" asked the White Rabbit. "No, I didn't. I said, 'Why?' She hit the Queen," the rabbit said. Alice started to laugh. "Quiet," said the rabbit again. "The Queen will hear you, she hears everything. You see, the Duchess came late." When she arrived, the Queen said, suddenly, the Queen shouted very loudly, "Cut off their heads." "Who's going to lose their head now?" Alice wondered. She began to feel afraid. "The Queen isn't angry with me now," she thought. "But it will happen. I would like to speak to somebody about it." She looked round. The White Rabbit wasn't there. She looked up. There was something above her head. "What is it?" she wondered. She watched for a minute or 2. It was a smile. "It's the Cheshire Cat," she thought. "Now I can talk to somebody." "How are you?" the Cheshire Cat asked. Alice waited. She thought, "I won't speak to it before it has its ears, or perhaps one ear." In another minute, she could see its ears and eyes. "Do you like the Queen?" the cat asked. "I don't," said Alice. But then she saw the Queen. She was very near Alice. "She's wonderful," said Alice. The Queen smiled and moved away. But the King saw the cat's head and came to Alice. "Who are you talking to?" he asked. "It's a friend, a Cheshire Cat," answered Alice. The King looked carefully at the cat. "I don't like it," said the King. "Well, I don't like you," said the cat. "That's not polite," said the King and got behind Alice. Alice said, "A cat can look at a king. I read that in a book, I think." "Well, this cat has to go," said the King. He called to the Queen, "My dear, I don't like this cat." The Queen had only one answer to problems. "Cut off its head," she shouted loudly. She didn't look at the cat. The King smiled happily. After a short time, there were a lot of people round the cat. There was the King and Queen, and a man with a very long knife in his hand. "How can I cut off its head?" asked the man with the knife. "I can't do it and I'm not going to." "Oh yes you are," said the king. "It's got a head, so you can cut it off." "Do something now, or I'll cut off everybody's head," said the queen angrily. "What do you think?" the king asked Alice. Alice thought for a minute. Then she said, "It's the Duchess's cat. Ask her about it." "Bring the Duchess here," the queen said. Then the Cheshire Cat's head started to vanish. Somebody came back with the Duchess. But now there was nothing above Alice's head, not an eye or an ear or a smile. The king looked for the cat for some time, but he couldn't find it anywhere. "Come for a walk, you dear thing," the Duchess said to Alice. She put her arm through Alice's and they walked through the garden. "She's very friendly to me," thought Alice. "Perhaps when the cook isn't there, she's nice. When I'm a duchess, I'm going to be kind to my children." "Are you thinking?" asked the Duchess. "You have to talk to me, you know." "All right," said Alice. She could hear the queen at the other end of the garden. "Cut off her head. Cut off his head," she shouted, every 2 or 3 minutes. "Will they cut off your head?" Alice asked the Duchess. "Oh no, they never cut off anybody's head. The queen likes saying it, but she never does it." Alice wanted to ask more questions but they heard a cry, "The trial is beginning." "What trial is it?" Alice asked. The Duchess didn't answer and started to run. Her arm was in Alice's, so Alice ran too. Chapter 9 Who Took the Tarts? Alice and the Duchess followed everybody into a house with one very large room. The king and queen were there. They sat on big chairs above all the animals and birds. All the cards were there too. Near the king was the white rabbit. He had a paper in his hand and looked very important. The knave of hearts stood in front of the king and queen. He stood between 2 men and his head was down. It was his trial. In the middle of the room was a table with a large plate of tarts on it. Alice found a place and sat down. She looked round. "I know a lot of the animals and birds here," she thought. She looked hungrily at the tarts. "I hope they finish the trial quickly," she thought. "Then we can eat the tarts." Suddenly, the white rabbit cried, "Quiet please." The king looked round the room. "Read the paper," he said. The white rabbit stood up and read from a very long paper. "The Queen of Hearts, she made some tarts, one lovely sunny day. The Knave of Hearts, he took those tarts, he took them all away." "Cut off his head," cried the queen. "No, no," said the rabbit. "We have to call people into the room, and ask them questions." "All right then. Call the Mad Hatter," said the king. The Mad Hatter came into the room. He had a teacup in one hand, and some bread and butter in the other hand. "Why did you call me?" "I wanted to finish my tea," he said. "When did you begin your tea?" asked the king. The Mad Hatter thought for a minute. The March Hare and the Mouse were quite near him and he looked at them for ideas. Then he said, "March the 14th, I think." 15th, said the March Hare. 16th, said the Mouse. "Write that down," said the king to the White Rabbit. Then he said to the Mad Hatter, "Take off your hat." "It isn't mine," said the Mad Hatter. "Oh, so you took it from somebody, you bad man," said the king. "No, no. I sell hats. I'm a hatter," answered the Mad Hatter. He looked very afraid. "Don't be afraid or I'll cut off your head," said the king. "I'm not a bad man," the Mad Hatter cried. "But the March Hare told me I didn't," the March Hare said quickly. "Well," the Mouse said, The Mad Hatter stopped and looked at the mouse. But the mouse didn't say anything, because he was asleep. After that, said the Mad Hatter, I cut some more bread and butter. But what did the mouse say? Asked the king. I can't remember, the Mad Hatter said. You have to remember, the king said, or I'll cut off your head. I'm a good man, sir, the unhappy Mad Hatter began. But the king wasn't interested now. You can go, he said to the Mad Hatter. The Mad Hatter ran out of the room. Take his head off outside, shouted the queen. 2 men ran after him. But the Mad Hatter ran very fast and they could not catch him. Alice did not feel very well. What's wrong with me? She wondered. And then she understood. I'm getting bigger again, she thought. She was between the Duchess and the mouse. You're hurting me, the Duchess said. I can't do anything, said Alice. I'm getting bigger. You can't get bigger here, said the mouse. Yes, I can, said Alice. You're getting bigger too. Yes, but not as fast as you, said the mouse. He got up and sat in a different place. Call the next person, said the king. The next person came in. It was the Duchess's cook. The king looked at her. What do you know about these tarts? He asked. The cook didn't answer. Speak, said the king. No, said the cook. Ask her some questions, the White Rabbit said to the king. All right, said the king. What was in those tarts? Fish, said the cook. Don't be stupid, said the king. Call the next person. Alice looked round. Who can it be? She wondered. The White Rabbit looked at his paper and read the next name, Alice. Chapter 10 The End of the Trial. Here, cried Alice and stood up quickly. But she was tall now, and chairs, tables and people fell here, there and everywhere. Put everything and everybody back, said the king loudly. Alice put them all back in their places. Then the king asked, What do you know about these tarts? Nothing, answered Alice. That's very important, said the king. You mean, unimportant, sir, said the White Rabbit. Unimportant, of course, said the king. Important, unimportant, important, unimportant, he repeated. He looked at Alice carefully. He took a book and read from it. Alice is more than a kilometer high. So she has to leave the room, he said. I'm not more than a kilometer high, Alice began. You are, said the king. More than 2 kilometers high, said the queen. Well, I'm not leaving this room, said Alice. The king's face went white. Cut off her head, shouted the queen. Nobody moved. You stupid woman, said Alice. She was very large now and she wasn't afraid of anybody. Cut off her head, shouted the queen. Don't be stupid, Alice said. Who's afraid of you? I'm not. You're only cards. The cards, all 52 of them, came down on top of Alice. She felt afraid and angry and started to fight them. Then she opened her eyes. She saw a tree, a big old tree. She was under it, next to her sister. Her sister's hand was on her hair. Wake up, Alice dear, her sister said. You slept for a long time. Oh, said Alice, and then she understood. She sat up and told her sister about the White Rabbit and the rabbit hole. When she finished her story, her sister laughed. Let's go home to tea, she said. It's getting late. Oh yes. I'd like some tea, cried Alice. And she got up and ran home. The end.